Hey, this is Warren Sprouse. I'm here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. on the Bible Forum. I want you to join us. You can tune in and watch while we are doing the program. You can participate in the chat room. You can give me your email address so I can send my email every Saturday, let you know what's going on. Check out the Facebook page, get on the Twitter account, all these kind of good things. Tonight I want to talk to you about Pearl Harbor. We remembered Pearl Harbor this week. Pearl Harbor and America's enduring grief. The Japanese, 1940-41, were worried about America's designs on the Pacific, and especially the South China Sea. Thinking that the Americans were going to cause them trouble in their efforts to take control of that area, they attacked and destroyed nearly 20 American naval vessels. Most of our battleships were there, and 2 were destroyed completely. I think 6 more were rendered inoperable. Over 300 airplanes swooped in that Sunday morning, claiming the lives of more than 2,000 American soldiers, wounding another 1,000. Termed by then President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a date that will live in infamy, this event almost 75 years ago would officially usher the United States into World War II. To honor this momentous occasion, and specifically those who served and sacrificed their lives to ensure our present freedoms, Pearl Harbor hosted its 75th commemoration of the attack this week. More than 10,000 people made a point of being there. Many of them the now dwindling survivors, all of whom would be in their 90s or better. The purpose of the event was not only to honor the past, but also to inspire the future, one brighter and focused on peace, particularly celebrating that which has existed between Japan and the U.S. for 71 years now. Japan is really an American success story, a tribal, clannish, Shinto-based society transformed by General Douglas MacArthur into a modern 20th century global leader in just 20 years. How did that happen? By simply applying Judeo-Christian principles of life, finance, and culture. Values and principles that lifted the veil of superstition and fear, replacing it with the values of self-respect, personal initiative, and competition. When the best cars in America are announced, generally Toyota and Honda are in the top of that list. World War II is a history lesson for most of us as Americans. But for those of us who grew up in the shadow of that great war, it's an ever-present, shaper and reminder. Our lives were shaped by the events following that war, by the men who returned home and simply went back to work. They didn't complain. They didn't march in the streets. They didn't look for a handout. They just went back to work. Women who had taken up where they left in industry, many of which went back home to start families. A home building boom ensued over the next 10 or 15 years. Anybody remember Levittown? You remember seeing the pictures of this place? I should put an S on it because there were a bunch of Levittowns all over the Northeast and beyond. In those days, Sears was selling pre-cut lumber for houses. You could buy a house, and everything would be cut to size. You just put it together. Of course, Sears sold just about everything you could imagine in those days. My father was a Marine in Okinawa. My father never talked about his time in Okinawa. Later in life, in his late 80s, early 90s, I challenged him to write about his life as he was getting ready to leave, that there would be some written word as to what the family was about. And unbeknownst to me, he started writing. But after he was gone, I realized that he only wrote about those 4 years. Anything before that, everything after that, was apparently not as dramatic or not as life-changing. Only those 4 years. The relationships that were forged during that time were what was important to him. My father was saved as a Christian in Naha, Okinawa, and kept in touch with a man in California he always referred to as his friend. They served together. He was led to that Bible study. The man invited him to a Bible study. There was a Navy, I forget what his rank was. He wasn't an admiral, but something, commander. Yeah, I think he was a commander, a doctor. He led the Bible study, and that's where my dad got saved. There were terms and phrases that grew out of that experience. We grew up with military terminology. One was a vulgar abbreviation, a phrase that was common, a word that was common that reflected a phrase that I won't repeat here. And I remember my dad using that. But I don't remember him using it much past my 10th birthday. By the time I got to be a teenager, I don't remember him doing that anymore. It was years later before I understood what this word actually stood for. And I took note as to how his vocabulary got cleaned up. These men kept their uniforms. They showed up as 80-year-old men, still wearing those colors in ceremonies and events. I learned how to tie a tie using a Marine Corps tie. That was in the early 1950s. America went to war that day, December 7th. Growing up, I always thought the war was a very long thing. I was probably an adult before I realized how very short it was. December 7th, 1941, to D-Day, June 6, 1944. 3.5 years. It would take another year before the war was formally declared over, May 1945. And then there was VE Day in August of that same year. 4 years to defeat 2 of the largest, most technically advanced and intent armies the world had ever seen. Both armies driven by religious zeal, both ruthless beyond anything we could imagine, both defeated in less time than it took to build the original World Trade Center buildings. It took 6 years to do that. As kids, we thought the war was a very, very long thing. It wasn't until later we learned how things actually went. That the first 3 years was a holding pattern, a building up. There were some large-scale battles and skirmishes, and people got killed. But it was about positioning, about maintaining, about controlling, and about preparing. Military advisors knew Japan would be relatively easy, and that's why they didn't commit a whole lot of our war machine to the Pacific, something that Douglas MacArthur found very difficult to tolerate. The Pacific War was largely a holding operation. In the West, the same was true for at least the first 2.5 years, as men and materiel were being accumulated and positioned for the thrust into Germany. When that came, it took less than a year to wrap it all up. Such was the power, the might, the ability, the determination of the United States of America. And And then, today we haven't fought a war since VE Day. Only police actions, Korea. A Cold War, so-called, because no shots were fired. A conflict in Vietnam. No armies have been committed to war. Contingencies, battalions, and there have been holding actions, there have been liberations. Because we as a people do not like war. And our young people don't seem to get that. Increasingly, due to our out-of-balance education system, more and more young people are being programmed to not simply reject war, but to wage a kind of war against it. They have been taught to view all military or just violence or violent efforts as unnecessary and counterproductive unless they're the ones doing it. So why do we war? What have our wars been about? I don't know that Americans have ever really started a war, unless you count the times when we have been accused of either egging an enemy on or placing ourselves in the way to be attacked so we could get involved for one reason or another. I think of Cuba and Southeast Asia. Well, there was that pesky little Mexican thing, where we ran the Mexicans off their own land and then fought a war to stop them from getting it back. But Mexico was not all that organized in those days, and we were. Besides, we had a president who dreamt of spreading the United States all the way to the Pacific, and a small, disorganized country like Mexico wasn't really enough to stop it. Their claims were largely land grants from kings and popes, people we did not know or care about. But the point is, the U.S. has had a great deal of power throughout her life, power she threw around to her own advantage, but not power by which she dominated smaller nations. America has always thought in terms of securing our borders and markets, expanding our territory on this continent, and building businesses, railroads, infrastructure, wealth. The military has a phrase: if you broke it, you bought it. We go and fight a war, a battle on your territory. When we're done, we'll fix it. Who does that? From Muslims pirating our shipping off the coast of Africa in the late 1800s, we sent the Marines. The Spanish blowing up one of our ships in Havana, we sent Teddy Roosevelt. We were willing to get into World War I. I should say unwilling to get into World War I, although many of our guys went serving under Blackjack Pershing and others. My brother went to John J. Pershing Elementary School. We were getting into the war. We were late getting into the war with Germany. Japan settled the issue for us, allied as they were with Germany. But after those great battles, we rebuilt Europe and Japan. Our greatest problem has been our success, and to a lesser degree, our arrogance. We think what we do is better than just about anybody else in the world. And it's largely true. Have you seen those British movies on Netflix, the ones in the 1960s and 70s? I've even seen some in the 1990s. The homes with the plumbing and the electrical systems, the infrastructure, the medical systems are all circa 1950s and 60s for Americans. We've always had it better. Why? Well, because monarchies don't do as well as republics. And dictatorships do worse. And what is our republic built upon? The Word of God. Read it. Read the Declaration. Read the Constitution. Keep in mind the Declaration is part of the Constitution. It's the preamble. Both the wording and the principles are taken right out of the Bible. Our people aren't perfect, never have been. Things happen. But our official position is that we have always sought to honor people and their rights, to seek ways to empower citizens, to provide a safe environment even from politicians. We tend to keep our economy on an even keel. We respect the rights and property of others. We provide redress in a court system that treats everyone as equals and is not overtly punitive or corrupt. And we have always honored family. Women and children have been prized and protected. We don't tax churches, and we don't tax religious ministries. We tip our hat to ladies as we pass by. Oh, wait, no, we don't. Not anymore, but we did. Why? It was polite. A Judeo-Christian ethic. God's standard. There was a time in this country when the town drunk would tip his hat to a lady. Things have changed, especially our attitude toward women. Largely because our people have abandoned God. See, God is not now viewed as necessary. He's unavailable. He's non-existent. And the result? American society has changed. It's more crude. It's more rude. It's more indecent. It's more stressful. And we got a drug for everything. It's more destructive and dangerous. And all of this is in direct response to our abandonment of God. That started in earnest in the 1960s. It has escalated in recent decades until we can't tell the believers from the unbelievers. Both have sex outside of marriage. Both kill their unborn children. Both divorce at will for any reason. Both use gutter language and worse. Both drink and smoke. Some even use those funny little cigarettes and take pills for just about anything. We go to psychiatrists who don't even believe in the very thing they are set up to treat. They are psychiatrists, soul doctors, practitioners. Suki, soul. But they don't believe you have one. Don't get me started. We are now a racist, bigoted, crude, arrogant, selfish bunch. At least that's what we're being told. Who's saying all this? The arrogant, crude, self-centered bigots and racists. Now, some of you don't know what these words mean. Most of us don't care, as long as we get to complain. But rank-and-file liberals, progressives, activists, and anarchists, they don't care about America. They don't care about you. They're not out to build a better America. They're out to feather their own nests. What marked the change? Well, historians look at 8 U.S. Supreme Court decisions in the 1970s and early 80s. Decisions that created what we now call the open society, meaning you can do whatever you want. In the beginning, they took prayer out of the Bible school. They took the Bible out of school, took prayer out of school. They legalized abortion. They made divorce easy to come by. They removed the distinction between a father and a mother as it pertains to caring for children and or working outside the home under non-discrimination principles. A very good decision, non-discrimination, recognizing that people should not, cannot be discriminated against unnecessarily or wantonly. They made a good decision, recognizing that people should not, cannot be hospitalized against their will, thinking about psychiatric hospitals. But in the mid-1970s, when that court decision was handed down, it turned millions of mentally ill people out into the streets, literally. They emptied the hospitals. State mental hospitals almost shut down. And these people were being housed in motels and other low-rent situations at government expense. And they were wandering the streets, creating a nuisance, in some cases attacking people. They were definitely abusing people verbally. Later on, there was a right to die. If you were a seriously ill patient, it was recognized that you had the right to kill yourself or have somebody do it for you. These and many more decisions continued to whittle away at the basic building block of society called the family. Children are emancipated at increasingly younger ages. Parents are being sued, sometimes by their children, for disciplining them beyond what they believe is right and or good, and not just for striking a child. It might be a bedtime or electronic device or friends or curfews. The family, which is the heart and soul of any society, is not what it used to be. And consequently, neither is America. Were Japan or some other nation to attack us the way they did in 1941, the response would be altogether different, and it wouldn't be for the good. In large part because America is divided and weak and misguided, and it ain't going to get better any day soon, until or unless we get back to basics. And we don't have enough people in this country, among the young people and the young adults, who care about it.